I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would just disappear. But after 25 years of watching my daughter Amanda treat me like her personal ATM and our suburban Boston home like a five-star hotel, something inside me finally snapped. When she vanished for 10 days without a word, leaving me pacing our hardwood floors at 3 a.m., calling hospitals and police stations, I discovered what real fear felt like. I also discovered something else: the profound silence of a house without demands, without entitlement, without the constant hum of being taken for granted. Amanda returned on a Tuesday morning like nothing had happened, her skin golden from Mediterranean sun, designer luggage trailing behind her. "I was traveling through Europe with friends," she announced, not even looking up from her phone. "Pay the card. I want to go shopping." The audacity hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, a 53-year-old widow who'd sacrificed everything to raise this beautiful, brilliant, completely entitled young woman, and she couldn't even apologize for the hell she'd put me through. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud at the absurdity of it all. The next morning, I was gone. I left a simple note on our granite kitchen counter. "Amanda, it's time you learned what independence really means. The house is yours for now. Figure it out." Mom. I packed one suitcase, withdrew half our savings, and drove my old Honda Civic toward something I couldn't yet name. What I found was myself. For the first time in decades, I wasn't someone's mother, someone's obligation, someone's convenience. I was Dorothy again, the woman who'd once believed she could change the world. My hands grew rough from real work. My back ached from good exhaustion. I slept deeply and dreamlessly. Meanwhile, back in our pristine suburban neighborhood, Amanda was learning lessons I'd apparently failed to teach her. The refrigerator didn't magically refill itself. Bills arrived with threatening red stamps. Her credit cards were declined when she couldn't pay them. Friends who'd always been impressed by her generosity, funded by my bank account, suddenly became scarce. Through it all, we didn't speak. Not for weeks, then months. I heard through others that Amanda had gotten a job, that she'd moved into a smaller place, that she'd started budgeting. I felt proud and heartbroken in equal measure. The breaking point came 8 months later, on Christmas Eve. I was serving dinner at a community center when I saw a familiar figure through frost-covered windows. Amanda stood in the snow, looking thinner but somehow more solid, wearing a coat she'd clearly bought with her own money. She'd found me. And for the first time in her adult life, she'd come looking not because she needed something, but because she had something to give, an apology that had been 25 years in the making. But would it be enough? Could two women who had both learned to stand on their own find a way back to each other? Or had my desperate act of love, abandoning her to save us both, destroyed the very relationship I'd been trying to protect? Some distances can't be measured in miles. Some notes change everything. And sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. The coffee maker gurgled to life at exactly 6:15 a.m., same as it had every morning for the past 8 years. I stood in my kitchen, bare feet cold against the ceramic tiles that Amanda had insisted we install 3 summers ago. "Mom, everyone has subway tiles now. The linoleum is so embarrassing when my friends come over." I'd written the check without question, just like I'd written so many others. Through the bay window above the sink, I could see the Hendersons' house across our tree-lined street in Newton. Margaret was already in her garden, deadheading her prized roses in her pink bathrobe. We'd been neighbors for 15 years, but our conversations never went deeper than comments about the weather or complaints about the city's new recycling schedule. I wondered sometimes if she knew that my husband had been gone for 7 years now, if she'd noticed that Amanda's car had been missing from our driveway for 10 days straight. 10 days. 240 hours of silence that had initially terrified me, then gradually transformed into something I couldn't quite name. Not peace, exactly, but something close to it. I poured my coffee into the blue ceramic mug Amanda had made me in her high school pottery class, back when she still did things like that, before she discovered that effort was optional when you had a mother willing to smooth every path. The mug was lopsided, with a handle that never quite fit my fingers right, but I'd used it every morning since she'd given it to me. It was one of the few things she'd ever made with her own hands. The morning news played on the small TV I kept on the kitchen counter, but I wasn't really listening. Something about traffic delays on Route 95, a water main break in Cambridge, a feel-good story about a local teacher who'd started a community garden. I used to be a teacher once, before Amanda was born. Ancient history now. I'd been 53 years old for exactly 4 months, though I felt older most days. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman with shoulder-length brown hair that was more gray than I cared to admit. laugh lines that had deepened into permanent fixtures, and eyes that my late husband Michael used to say were the color of autumn leaves. Hazel with gold flecks, he'd whisper. Back when we were young and thought we had all the time in the world. Michael had been gone since Amanda's senior year of high school. Heart attack at 51, right there in our driveway, key still in his hand from his evening jog. One moment he was kissing me goodbye, promising to pick up groceries on his way home from work, and the next moment our neighbor Tom Chen was pounding on our door, his face white with shock. That's when the real spoiling began, I suppose. Amanda had always been our princess, but after Michael died, I became desperate to shield her from any more pain. College tuition at Boston University, paid in full, no student loans, a car for her 18th birthday, credit cards for emergencies that somehow always involved shopping or expensive dinners with friends, an allowance that continued well into her 20s because finding yourself was apparently a full-time job that came with no paycheck. The house felt different when she wasn't here. Cleaner, for one thing. The granite countertops stayed clear of half-empty Starbucks cups and designer makeup that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The hardwood floors in the living room weren't scattered with magazines and shopping bags from Newbury Street. The silence had weight to it, but it wasn't oppressive. It was almost restful. I'd spent the first few days of her absence in panic mode, called her cell phone dozens of times, only to reach voicemail with that breezy message. Hey, you've reached Amanda. I'm probably doing something way more fun than answering your call, so leave a message and maybe I'll get back to you. I'd called her 3 closest friends, Brittany, Madison, and Kate, but they'd all claimed ignorance. I'd even called the police on day 4, only to be told that a 25-year-old woman had every right to go wherever she pleased, without informing her mother. By day 7, something had shifted. I found myself sleeping until 8 instead of waking at 6 to make sure Amanda had everything she needed for whatever plans she may or may not have had. I read 3 books that week. Actual novels, not just the home improvement magazines that usually constituted my literary intake. I cooked meals I wanted to eat, instead of the constant rotation of Amanda's favorites. Sushi from that expensive place in Harvard Square. Organic quinoa bowls, those overpriced smoothies that required ingredients I had to special order online. I'd even started talking to Margaret Henderson, really talking. Turned out she'd been divorced for 2 years and was struggling with her own empty nest syndrome since her youngest had left for college. We'd shared a bottle of wine on her back deck 2 nights ago, watching the sunset paint the sky purple and gold over the old oak trees that lined our street. You seem different, she'd said, studying me over her wine glass. More? Present? Somehow? I knew what she meant, even if I couldn't articulate it yet. The garage door opening jolted me back to the present. I knew that sound. Amanda's BMW. The one I'd helped her buy 2 years ago when her old Honda wasn't safe enough for her daily commute to her various part-time jobs that never seemed to last more than a few months. I glanced at the clock. 9:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Of course she'd return when it was most convenient for her. I didn't run to greet her. That surprised me. Usually I'd be at the door before she'd even turned off the engine, relief flooding through me that my baby was home safe. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen, refilling my coffee mug and listening to the sounds of her entrance. Car door slamming, heels clicking against the concrete, the jangle of keys. The side door that led from the garage into our mudroom opened with its familiar squeak. I'd been meaning to oil those hinges for months. Mom? Amanda's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted something. Bright, casual, with just a hint of entitlement that she probably didn't even realize she had. Kitchen, I called back, not moving from my spot by the window. She appeared in the doorway and I had to catch my breath. She was gorgeous, there was no denying that. Michael's dark hair and my eyes, but with a confidence that neither of us had ever possessed. Her skin was golden brown, clearly kissed by Mediterranean sun, and she was wearing clothes I didn't recognize. A flowing white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. Sandals that looked handcrafted and expensive. Her hair was shorter, cut in a trendy bob that framed her face perfectly. Hey, she said, dropping her designer purse on the kitchen island like she'd only been gone for a few hours instead of 10 days. God, I'm exhausted. International flights are literally the worst. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, an apology, some acknowledgement that she'd put me through hell. Instead, she wandered to the refrigerator and opened it, frowning at the contents. We're out of that Greek yogurt I like, she said, closing the door with a slight slam. And what's with all the actual food? When did you start buying vegetables that aren't pre-cut? Where have you been, Amanda? I asked quietly. She was checking her phone now, thumbs flying across the screen. Oh, right. I meant to text you. Brittany's dad had business in London, and he got us all seats on his company jet. We did London, Paris, Rome. It was incredible. You should see the photos. She held up her phone, showing me a series of selfies. Amanda and her friends in front of the Eiffel Tower. Amanda with a glass of wine overlooking the Thames. Amanda laughing in what looked like an expensive restaurant. You've been in Europe, I said. It wasn't a question. She was texting someone now, barely paying attention to our conversation. Oh, and I need you to pay off my Visa card. I may have gone a little crazy with the shopping. There was this amazing boutique in Rome, and Paris fashion is just insane. Also, I want to hit Newbury Street today. I saw the cutest boots online while we were traveling. I set my coffee mug down carefully on the granite counter. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. You've been gone for 10 days, I said. 10 days, Amanda. Without a word, without a text, without anything. She looked up from her phone and I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, annoyance, cross her face. Mom, I'm 25 years old. I don't need to check in with you every 5 minutes. Besides, you worry too much. I was with Brittany and Madison and Kate. We weren't exactly going to get kidnapped or something. I called the police. This got her attention. She actually looked at me now, really looked. You called the police? That's so embarrassing. What did you tell them? That my daughter had disappeared. I didn't disappear. I went on vacation. She said it like I was being deliberately dense. It was spontaneous. That's what makes it fun. I stared at her. This beautiful, selfish, completely oblivious young woman who'd somehow grown up in my house without learning the most basic lessons about consideration, responsibility, or respect. When had I stopped being her mother and started being her enabler? So you'll pay the card? She continued, already moving past what she clearly considered a minor misunderstanding. I also need cash for shopping today. My debit card got declined yesterday, which was super weird. That's when it happened. The laugh. It started somewhere deep in my chest, bubbling up like a spring that had been capped for too long. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of 25 years of accumulated frustration and disappointment finding its voice. Amanda stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What's so funny? You, I said, still laughing. This whole situation, the audacity of it all. Audacity? Her voice took on that sharp edge it got when she felt criticized. I don't know what you mean. I looked at her. Really looked. At the designer dress I'd indirectly paid for with the credit card she was now asking me to clear. At the expensive highlights in her hair, the professional manicure, the confident way she stood in this kitchen like she owned it instead of living in it rent-free. At the complete absence of awareness that anything she'd done might be problematic. No, I said simply. I don't think you do. She waited for me to elaborate, but I didn't. For the first time in recent memory, I let the silence stretch between us. She shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tapping against the side of her phone. So, the credit card? She prompted. I need to think about it. This was clearly not the answer she'd expected. Amanda's brow furrowed in that way it had since she was a toddler when things didn't go according to her plan. Think about what? It's just money, Mom. It's not like we can't afford it. Just money. I thought about the years I'd taught at Newton South High School before she was born, how much I'd loved shaping young minds, watching students discover their potential. I'd planned to go back to work when Amanda started school, but there had always been some reason why she needed me more. Soccer practices and piano lessons, and later, college applications and emotional crises and job interviews that never seemed to pan out. I thought about the retirement account I'd been slowly draining to fund her lifestyle. The vacation to Ireland I'd been planning for years, but kept postponing because Amanda always seemed to need something. I thought about Michael, who'd worked 60-hour weeks toward the end of his life because he wanted to make sure we were financially secure, and how he'd never gotten to see Europe himself. I'm going upstairs to shower, I said instead of answering her question. Your laundry is in the basket by the washer. My laundry? She looked genuinely confused. But you always... I know what I always do, I interrupted gently. But today, I'm going to shower. And then I think I'll go to the library. I left her standing in the kitchen, confusion written all over her face. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the room I'd shared with Michael, the room that still smelled faintly of his cologne even after all these years, I could hear her calling someone, probably Brittany. I don't know what's wrong with her, Amanda was saying. She's being super weird about money all of a sudden. Like, why is she making such a big deal out of this? I closed my bedroom door and stood in front of the full-length mirror that had been Michael's idea when we'd renovated this room 15 years ago. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, not because I looked different, but because something in my eyes had changed. There was a spark there that had been missing for so long I'd forgotten what it looked like. In the shower, I let the hot water wash away 10 days of worry, 25 years of accumulated resentment, and decades of making myself smaller so that everyone else could be bigger. When I stepped out, I didn't immediately reach for my usual uniform of worn jeans and one of Michael's old sweaters. Instead, I chose a blue dress I'd bought 2 years ago but never worn because Amanda had said the color washed me out. It didn't wash me out. It made my eyes look like autumn leaves again. Downstairs, I could hear Amanda on a phone call, her voice carrying that particular whine it took on when things weren't going her way. I gathered my purse and car keys, moving quietly toward the garage. "Mom?" Amanda appeared in the mudroom doorway. "Where are you going?" "I thought we could have lunch and then hit the mall." "I really need those boots, and there's this jacket I saw online." "I'm going to the library," I said. "And then I think I'll drive around for a while. It's a beautiful day." "But what about—" "Figure it out, Amanda." I was already in my car backing out of the garage when I saw her face through the kitchen window. She looked lost, maybe for the first time in her life. Part of me, the mother part that had been running the show for 25 years, wanted to run back inside, apologize, fix whatever was broken. Instead, I drove toward town, toward the Newton Free Library where I'd spent countless hours as a young mother, reading to Amanda when she was small enough to sit in my lap and listen to stories. I rolled the windows down and let the October air fill the car, carrying with it the smell of fallen leaves and possibility. For the first time in a decade, I had absolutely no plan for my day. No schedule built around Amanda's needs, no errands that served her convenience, no phone calls from her asking me to solve problems she was perfectly capable of handling herself. It was terrifying. It was liberating. It was exactly what I needed. That evening, I came home to find Amanda on the couch, surrounded by shopping bags. She'd clearly figured out the credit card situation, probably called the company directly and had the charges cleared. She'd always been resourceful when it served her purposes. "I got the boots," she announced, holding up a box, "and the jacket. And I found the most amazing earrings at Nordstrom. Want to see?" I stood in the doorway of our living room, looking at the scene that had played out hundreds of times before. Amanda, flushed with the excitement of acquisition, eager to share her purchases with the woman who'd made them possible. Me, expected to ooh and ah over things I couldn't afford for myself, but regularly provided for her. "I'm tired," I said simply. "I'm going to bed." "But it's only 8:30, she protested. "I thought we could watch a movie or something. I haven't seen you in 10 days. "And whose fault is that?" I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I kissed the top of her head. She still smelled like the expensive shampoo I bought but never used myself, and headed upstairs. In my bedroom, I sat at the desk where I used to grade papers back when I was still teaching. I pulled out a sheet of the good stationery Michael had given me for our anniversary one year, the kind I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. I stared at the blank page for a long time, thinking about the woman I used to be and the woman I wanted to become, thinking about Amanda's complete lack of awareness that her actions might affect anyone else, thinking about the 10 days of silence that had shown me what my life could look like if I stopped revolving around someone else's needs. Finally, I picked up my pen and began to write. "Amanda," I started, then stopped. "How do you explain 25 years of accumulated mistakes in a single letter? How do you tell your child that you failed them not by loving them too little, but by loving them too much in all the wrong ways?" I crumpled up the first attempt, then the second, then the third. Outside my bedroom window, the streetlights of our quiet Newton neighborhood cast long shadows across the sidewalk where Amanda had learned to ride her bike, where she'd played hopscotch with the other kids, where she'd grown from a sweet little girl into a woman who thought the world owed her everything. Tomorrow was Wednesday. I had no obligations, no schedule, no reason to be anywhere at any particular time. For the first time in decades, I was accountable only to myself. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it made me smile. I pulled out another sheet of stationery and began again. I woke before dawn on Wednesday morning, my body alert in a way it hadn't been in years. Through my bedroom window, the world was still painted in shades of charcoal and navy blue, the streetlights of Newton casting weak pools of yellow light across the empty sidewalks. Margaret Henderson's house across the street was dark, as were all the others in our quiet neighborhood where people lived predictable lives in predictable rhythms. But nothing about this morning felt predictable. I padded downstairs barefoot, avoiding the creaky third step that always announced my presence to the rest of the house. In the kitchen, I made coffee in deliberate silence. No morning news, no familiar routines. Just me and the gradual lightening of the sky, and a decision that had crystallized overnight like frost on glass. On the counter, exactly where I'd left it the night before, was the note. 5 attempts had led to this final version. Simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret. Amanda, it's time you learned what independence really means. The house is yours for now. Figure it out. Mom. 24 words to end 25 years of enabling. I'd signed it formally, not with the "Love Mom" or XOXO I usually scrawled at the bottom of grocery lists and birthday cards. This wasn't a love letter. This was a declaration of war, or perhaps, finally, a declaration of peace. I'd already packed the night before, after Amanda had gone to bed surrounded by her shopping bags like a dragon hoarding treasure. One large suitcase with clothes I actually liked, not the shapeless sweaters and worn jeans that had become my uniform of maternal invisibility. The good perfume Michael had given me that I'd been saving for special occasions. The jewelry I never wore because Amanda had always borrowed it and forgotten to return it. Books I'd been meaning to read for years. I'd also made copies of important documents and transferred exactly half of our savings, my half, into a new account I'd opened online at 2 a.m. It was surprisingly easy to disappear when you put your mind to it. The hardest part had been deciding what to do about the house. In the end, I'd left detailed instructions for Amanda about the mortgage, utilities, and maintenance, along with the contact information for our lawyer and accountant. I'd paid the bills through the end of the year, giving her time to figure out how to manage her own life without throwing her immediately to the wolves. It was more consideration than she'd shown me in years. By 6 a.m., I was loading my Honda Civic in the garage, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd planned every detail. Amanda's BMW sat beside my car, still warm from yesterday's shopping expedition. A few crumpled receipts visible through the passenger window. I wondered how long it would take her to realize that someone had to make payments on that car, that insurance didn't pay for itself, that gas stations weren't charitable organizations. I was placing my suitcase in the trunk when I heard footsteps above, Amanda getting up for one of her rare early mornings. I froze, listening to the familiar sounds of her routine. Bedroom door opening, footsteps to the bathroom, the shower turning on. She'd be in there for at least 30 minutes, using up all the hot water as usual. Perfect. I left the note on the kitchen island, propped against the ceramic bowl where we kept the car keys. Amanda would find it when she came downstairs looking for her usual breakfast of Greek yogurt and granola that she'd somehow never learned to buy for herself. Walking back through the house I'd called home for 18 years felt like a farewell tour of my own life. The living room where Amanda had taken her first steps, where we'd celebrated Christmas mornings and birthday parties and graduation dinners. The dining room where Michael and I had hosted dinner parties back when we still had a social life, before everything became about Amanda's needs and schedules. The family room where I'd helped Amanda with homework she didn't want to do, where I'd listened to teenage drama about boys and friends and teachers who didn't understand her. In the hallway, I paused in front of the gallery wall of family photos. Amanda as a toddler, gap-toothed and grinning. Amanda's kindergarten graduation. Amanda and Michael at a Red Sox game, both wearing matching caps and sharing a box of Cracker Jacks. Amanda's high school graduation, beautiful in her cap and gown, me and Michael flanking her like proud bookends. There were no photos of just me and Michael. No photos of me alone. Somewhere along the way, I'd become invisible in my own family album, present only as the person behind the camera, documenting everyone else's important moments. I took one photo from the wall, a small one of Michael and me on our wedding day, young and ridiculous and completely convinced we knew what we were doing. We were laughing at something the photographer had said, our heads tilted toward each other, my hand on Michael's chest, his arm wrapped around my waist. We looked like people who believed in forever. Upstairs, the shower was still running. I could hear Amanda singing something I didn't recognize, her voice echoing off the tile walls of the bathroom we'd renovated for her 16th birthday, because the old one wasn't Instagram-worthy enough. I slipped out through the garage, closing the door as quietly as possible behind me. The morning air was crisp with that particular October bite that made New England autumns famous. The maples lining our street were just beginning to turn, their edges touched with gold and orange. It was going to be a beautiful day for driving, for disappearing, for starting over at 53 years old. I had no destination in mind when I pulled out of our driveway. No plan beyond getting as far from Newton as a single tank of gas would take me. North seemed right, toward New Hampshire, maybe Vermont, toward mountains and small towns and places where nobody knew me as Amanda Williams' mother. The suburbs gave way to highway, and highway gave way to countryside. I drove with the windows cracked, letting the cool air whip through the car, carrying with it the scent of pine trees and wood smoke and possibility. The radio played classic rock from a station that faded in and out as I climbed into the hills. But I didn't mind the static. The silence between songs felt profound, like the space between one life and another. I stopped for gas in a town called Hillsborough, New Hampshire, population 5,000, according to the weathered sign at the town limits. The gas station was attached to a general store that looked like it hadn't changed since 1975, complete with a hand-painted sign advertising cold beer, hot coffee, fresh bait. An old man in flannel and work boots nodded at me from beside the coffee machine. "Beautiful morning," he said, his accent thick with New England vowels. "Yes," I agreed, and realized it was the first word I'd spoken aloud since leaving the house. "It really is." I bought coffee in a paper cup that warmed my hands and a local newspaper I didn't need, but wanted anyway. Something to prove I'd been here, in this small place where people still said good morning to strangers. Back on the road, I found myself thinking about Amanda's morning routine, now unfolding in my absence. She'd emerge from her shower expecting the coffee to be ready, the newspaper folded beside her usual spot at the kitchen island, maybe a bagel toasted to her exact specifications. Instead, she'd find silence and my note and the dawning realization that she was truly alone for the first time in her adult life. Part of me, the mother part that had dominated my identity for so long, felt cruel for savoring that image. But another part, a part that had been buried under years of caretaking and enabling, felt something that might have been justice. By noon, I was deep in Vermont, winding through mountain roads that twisted between forests so thick they blocked out half the sky. I'd turned off my cell phone hours ago, but I could imagine it lighting up with increasingly frantic messages from Amanda. By now, she'd have found the note. By now, she'd have realized that her credit cards weren't working, that the checking account she used like a personal ATM was suddenly empty, that there was no one to call who could solve this particular problem for her. I stopped for lunch in a town called Millfield, mostly because I was hungry and it was there. The diner looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, complete with red vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone Han. I ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, comfort food I hadn't allowed myself in years, because Amanda considered grilled cheese gross and claimed tomato soup was too acidic for her sensitive stomach. "You passing through or staying a while?" asked the waitress, a woman about my age with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I'm not sure yet," I said, and realized it was the truth. "Well, if you're looking for a place to stay, Mrs. Patterson runs a nice bed and breakfast just up the road. Clean rooms, good breakfast, reasonable rates." I thanked her and ate my lunch slowly, watching the rhythm of small-town life unfold outside the diner window. A mother pushing a stroller past the hardware store, two elderly men in conversation outside the post office, a teenager walking a dog, both of them moving with the unhurried pace of people who had nowhere urgent to be. It occurred to me that I hadn't watched life happen without worrying about Amanda's part in it for decades. Even when she wasn't physically present, she'd occupied the mental space where observation and contemplation should have lived. What was Amanda doing? What did Amanda need? How could I solve Amanda's latest crisis before it became my crisis too? Now, for the first time in 25 years, my thoughts were my own. After lunch, I drove around Millfield, getting a feel for the place. It was the kind of town that had seen better days but was holding on with quiet dignity. The main street was lined with century-old brick buildings, some thriving, others with "for rent" signs in their windows. There was a library that looked like it had been built during the Depression, a community center with peeling paint but well-tended flower boxes, a school where children's artwork decorated the windows. I found myself parking outside the community center, drawn by a handwritten sign in the window. Volunteers needed, literacy program, seniors lunch, after-school care. It had been years since I'd volunteered for anything, years since I'd had time for anything that wasn't directly related to Amanda's immediate needs. A woman emerged from the building as I sat studying the sign. She was younger than me, maybe early 40s, with the kind of purposeful energy that spoke of someone who got things done. "Can I help you?" she asked, approaching my car with a friendly but curious expression. "I was just reading about your volunteer opportunities," I said. "I'm a former teacher." Her face lit up. "Are you kidding me?" We haven't had a certified teacher volunteer here in 3 years. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the director. What subjects did you teach? English, literature, and composition. High school level. Oh my God, you're like the answer to my prayers. We have kids here who are reading 3-4 grade levels behind where they should be. Their parents work 2 and 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, so homework help is a luxury they can't afford. Are you available? I looked at Sarah Mitchell, with her eager expression and her obvious dedication to helping kids who needed it. And I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. The desire to be useful in a way that had nothing to do with solving Amanda's problems. I might be, I said. I'm not sure how long I'll be in town, but while I'm here, that would be amazing, seriously. Even a few weeks would make such a difference for these kids. We talked for another 20 minutes, standing in the afternoon sun outside a community center that needed volunteers, in a town that needed help, surrounded by people who would value my contribution instead of taking it for granted. When Sarah gave me her card and asked if I could start tomorrow, I said yes without thinking about it. It wasn't until I was back in my car that I realized I'd just made a commitment that had nothing to do with Amanda's wants or needs or schedule. I'd made a decision based entirely on what I wanted to do, what I thought was important, what would make me feel useful and fulfilled. The feeling was intoxicating. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the area, driving past farms and forests and small lakes that reflected the mountains like mirrors. At a roadside stand, I bought apples and local honey and a loaf of bread that was still warm from the oven. Simple pleasures that I'd forgotten how to appreciate when every grocery trip was a negotiation with Amanda's complicated dietary preferences and brand loyalties. By evening, I'd rented a small apartment above the diner where I'd had lunch. It was nothing like the house in Newton, just 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with fixtures that had seen better decades. But it was clean and quiet and mine, and the rent was less than what I'd been spending monthly on Amanda's credit card bills. Mrs. Patterson from the bed and breakfast had offered me a room, but I wanted something more permanent, something that felt like a choice rather than a temporary escape. The apartment came furnished with the basics: a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a couch that had probably been fashionable in the 1980s. It was perfect. I unpacked my single suitcase, hanging my clothes in the narrow closet, arranging my books on the windowsill that looked out over Main Street. For dinner, I walked to the town's only restaurant, a family-owned place that specialized in comfort food and had been operating in the same location for 60 years, according to the framed newspaper clippings on the walls. I ordered meatloaf and mashed potatoes, ate slowly while reading the local newspaper I'd bought at the gas station. The headlines were refreshingly small-scale. The high school football team's chances for the regional championship, a dispute over snow removal funding, plans for the annual Harvest Festival. Problems that could be solved by reasonable people working together, not the endless manufactured drama that seemed to follow Amanda wherever she went. It was dark when I walked back to my apartment, Main Street lit by old-fashioned streetlights that cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk. In the windows of the houses I passed, I could see families settling in for the evening. Couples watching television, children doing homework at kitchen tables, teenagers on their phones in ways that looked normal rather than obsessive. Upstairs in my tiny apartment, I made tea in a mug I'd found in the kitchen cabinet and sat by the window, looking down at the quiet street. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to think about Amanda, to wonder what she was doing, how she was handling my disappearance. I'd been gone for 12 hours. By now, she'd have tried calling me dozens of times. She'd have probably called Brittany and Madison and Kate, expecting them to solve this problem for her. She might have even called the police again, though they'd be even less sympathetic to a 25-year-old woman whose mother had left her a note explaining her absence. More importantly, she'd have started to realize the practical implications of my departure. The credit cards weren't working because I'd canceled them. The checking account was empty because I'd transferred my half to a new bank. The refrigerator was empty because I was the one who did the grocery shopping. The laundry was piling up because I was the one who did the washing and folding and putting away. All the invisible labor that had kept her life running smoothly was suddenly, starkly visible by its absence. I imagined her standing in our kitchen, surrounded by the silence that had become my companion over the past 12 hours, finally understanding what it felt like to be truly alone with your own choices and their consequences. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, it made me hopeful. Before bed, I called my sister Jennifer in California. We'd grown distant over the years, partly geography, partly the way Amanda's needs had consumed all my available time and emotional energy. Jennifer had never had children, had built a successful career as a veterinarian, had traveled the world with her partner Susan. I'd envied her freedom even as I'd convinced myself that my sacrifices for Amanda were more meaningful. Dorothy? Jennifer's voice was surprised but warm. Is everything okay? You never call this late. I left, I said without preamble. I left Amanda and the house and everything. I'm in Vermont. There was a long pause. Then, oh my God, finally? Honey, I've been waiting 20 years for you to realize that you were enabling that girl instead of parenting her. What happened? I told her about Europe, about the credit card demands, about the complete lack of awareness or apology. I told her about the note, about driving north without a destination, about the apartment I'd rented and the volunteer work I'd committed to starting tomorrow. I'm proud of you, Jennifer said when I finished. I know that sounds strange, but I'm really proud of you. You haven't sounded this much like yourself since before Michael died. I feel terrible, I admitted. She's never been alone before. She doesn't know how to do anything for herself. Because you never let her learn. Dorothy, Amanda is 25 years old. Do you know what I was doing when I was 25? I was finishing veterinary school, working 3 part-time jobs to pay rent, and somehow managing to feed myself and do my own laundry and maintain friendships. Most people figure out how to be adults because they have to. Amanda never had to because you did everything for her. I knew Jennifer was right, but knowing and feeling were 2 different things. What if she can't handle it? What if I've damaged her so badly that she can't function without me? Then she'll learn, or she won't. But either way, it won't be your fault or your responsibility anymore. You gave her every advantage, every opportunity, every cushion a person could have. If she can't translate that into a functioning adult life, that's on her, not on you. We talked for another hour, and for the first time in years, Jennifer and I sounded like sisters again, instead of strangers connected only by shared DNA and childhood memories. She told me about her practice, about the trip to New Zealand she and Susan were planning, about the pottery classes she'd started taking. I told her about Millfield, about the community center, about the strange exhilaration of making decisions based solely on what I wanted. How long are you planning to stay? She asked. I don't know. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. I want to see what happens when Amanda has to figure things out for herself. I want to see what happens when I'm not there to solve every problem before she even realizes it exists. And what if she doesn't figure it out? What if she calls and begs you to come home? I looked out my window at the quiet street, at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky, at this small town that had welcomed me without questions or conditions. Then she'll have to figure out a different way, I said, because I'm not going back to being someone's full-time enabler. That version of me is done. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, processing the day, processing the magnitude of what I'd done. 24 hours ago, I'd been Dorothy Williams, Amanda's mother, defined entirely by my relationship to someone else's needs. Now I was just Dorothy, a 53-year-old woman starting over in a town where nobody knew my history, where I could be anyone I chose to be. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I was getting ready for bed when my cell phone rang. I'd turned it back on to call Jennifer, and now Amanda's name was flashing on the screen. It was almost midnight. She'd been trying to reach me for over 12 hours. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to pick up, to explain, to make sure she was okay. The mother in me was screaming to answer, to fix whatever crisis she was undoubtedly facing. Instead, I turned the phone off again and went to bed. Outside my window, Millfield slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. Inside my tiny apartment, I lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a new place, adjusting to the profound silence of a life that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in 25 years, I fell asleep without worrying about what Amanda might need from me tomorrow. It was the most restful night's sleep I'd had in decades. 3 weeks into my new life in Millfield, I received my first letter from Amanda. Not a text, not a voicemail, but an actual letter, written on the expensive cream-colored stationery I'd bought her for college graduation and that she'd never used until now. It arrived on a Thursday morning, forwarded by the post office from my Newton address to the apartment above the diner. I stared at the envelope for a full 10 minutes before opening it, sitting at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. Outside my window, Main Street was coming alive with its usual quiet rhythm. Sarah Mitchell unlocking the community center across the street. Old Tom Henderson, no relation to my neighbor Margaret, opening his barber shop, the morning regulars filing into the diner below. This had become my routine, Coffee at 7, volunteering at the community center from 8:30 to noon, lunch at the diner where Betty, the waitress who'd recommended Mrs. Patterson's B&B, saved me the corner booth by the window, afternoon walks through the surrounding hills, evenings reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. It was a simple life, maybe even a boring life by Amanda's standards, but it was mine. The letter was dated 2.5 weeks earlier. She'd apparently spent several days working up the courage to send it. Mom, I don't understand why you left. I know you're angry about the Europe thing, but I don't get why you had to be so dramatic about it. I tried calling you like 100 times, but your phone goes straight to voicemail, and when I called the phone company, they said the account was closed. I had to figure out how to pay the electric bill yesterday because they sent a notice saying they were going to shut off the power. Did you know that you can't just pay bills online without knowing all these account numbers and passwords? I had to go to their office in person and wait in line for like 2 hours. It was horrible. The refrigerator broke last week, and when I called the repair guy, he wanted $300 just to look at it. I don't have $300, Mom. My credit cards don't work anymore, and I don't understand why. I've been eating takeout for weeks, but that's expensive, and I'm running out of money. Brittany's dad offered me a job at his company, but it's just filing and answering phones, and it only pays 15s an hour. That's not enough to live on. I don't know how people survive on so little money. I miss you. I miss our Sunday morning pancakes and the way you always knew how to fix things when they went wrong. I don't know how to do any of this stuff by myself. Please come home. Love, Amanda. I read the letter 3 times, searching for an apology that wasn't there. An acknowledgement of responsibility that never came. Even in her distress, even facing the first real consequences of her adult life, Amanda's letter was fundamentally about how my actions had inconvenienced her, not about how her actions had hurt me. But there were glimpses of growth, tiny cracks in the armor of entitlement. She'd gone to the electric company in person. She'd taken a job, even if she considered it beneath her. She was beginning to understand that money wasn't infinite, that services cost money, that someone had been handling all these details for her entire adult life. It was a start. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the other mail I'd been accumulating: voter registration for Millfield, a library card application, a flyer for the upcoming Harvest Festival where Sarah had asked me to help run the literacy booth. Evidence of a life being built rather than maintained. That afternoon, I was working with Marcus, a 14-year-old who read at a 6th grade level, but had the vocabulary of someone much older. His parents both worked at the mill outside of town, long hours that left them exhausted and unavailable for homework help. Marcus was smart enough to know he was behind, proud enough to be embarrassed about it, and motivated enough to stay after school 3 days a week to work with me. We were reading The Outsiders, his choice, not mine, when he looked up from the page and said, "Mrs. Williams, do you have kids?" The question caught me off guard. In Millfield, I was known simply as Dorothy, the former teacher who'd shown up one day and started helping kids with their reading. I'd deliberately kept my personal history vague, unwilling to explain the complicated circumstances that had brought me here. "I have a daughter," I said carefully. "She's 25. "That's cool. I bet she's proud of you for helping us and stuff." I looked at Marcus, with his serious eyes and worn sneakers and determination to improve himself despite every obstacle, and I felt something crack open in my chest. "I hope so," I said. "Someday. Do you miss her?" The honest answer was complicated. I missed the Amanda who used to curl up in my lap for bedtime stories, who made me lopsided pottery mugs and drew pictures of our family in crayon. I missed the possibility of who she could have become if I'd been a different kind of mother, if I'd taught her resilience instead of dependence, gratitude instead of entitlement. But did I miss the Amanda who'd stood in my kitchen 3 weeks ago, demanding that I pay for her European vacation while showing no awareness of the panic she'd caused me? Did I miss the constant anxiety of wondering what crisis she'd create next, what demands she'd make, what boundaries she'd cross because I'd never taught her that boundaries existed? "It's complicated," I told Marcus, which was true enough. "My mom says grown-up feelings are always complicated," he said, returning his attention to the book. "That's why being a kid is easier." After Marcus left, I stayed at the community center to help Sarah prepare for the evening GED classes. We worked in comfortable silence, organizing worksheets and setting up chairs, and I found myself thinking about Marcus's simple wisdom. Being a kid was easier, but only if the adults in your life did their jobs properly. Only if they provided structure and boundaries and consequences along with love and support. I'd given Amanda endless love and support, but precious little structure, fewer boundaries, and almost no meaningful consequences. I'd been so afraid of her experiencing any discomfort or disappointment that I'd protected her from the very experiences that might have taught her to cope with life's inevitable challenges. "You're looking thoughtful," Sarah observed, arranging pencils in a coffee can that had been repurposed as a pencil holder. "Just thinking about parenting," I said. "About the difference between helping and enabling." Sarah paused in her organizing. "Kids or adults?" "Both, I guess." She nodded, understanding more than I'd expected. "I see it all the time here. Parents who want to help their kids succeed but end up doing the work for them instead of teaching them how to do it themselves. It's a hard balance." "What's the solution?" "Step back and let them fail sometimes. Let them struggle with problems that won't kill them so they can learn to solve problems that might." She looked around the community center, at the hand-drawn posters advertising various programs, at the mismatched furniture donated by families who'd outgrown it. This place exists because someone decided that helping people develop their own capabilities was more important than just giving them what they needed in the moment. That evening, I walked home through Millfield's quiet streets thinking about capabilities versus needs, about the difference between supporting someone and rescuing them. The town was settling into its evening rhythm. Porch lights coming on, the smell of dinner cooking drifting from kitchen windows, families visible through living room windows, sharing meals and homework time, and the ordinary business of daily life. I'd been living here for 3 weeks, and already I felt more integrated into this community than I ever had in Newton, despite 18 years in the same neighborhood. Here, people knew me as the woman who helped kids with their reading, who bought her groceries at Peterson's Market and her coffee at the diner, who'd volunteered to help with the church food drive without being asked twice. In Newton, I'd been Amanda's mother, the woman who drove the blue Honda, who kept her house neat and her daughter well-dressed and her problems private. I'd been a role, not a person. The second letter arrived a month later, this one thicker, written on regular notebook paper. "Mom, I got the job at Mr. Patterson's company. I know I said it was just filing, but it turns out there's more to it than that. I'm learning about invoicing and inventory and how to use Excel properly. It's actually kind of interesting, even though the pay still sucks. I had to move out of the house. The mortgage payment is $3,200 a month, and even working full-time, I can't afford that plus utilities and food and car payments and everything else. I didn't realize how expensive everything is. How did you manage all this when you weren't working? I'm renting a room from Mrs. Chen next door. Do you remember her? She's actually really nice, and she doesn't charge me much because I help her with yard work and grocery shopping. Her husband died last year, and she gets lonely. We watch Jeopardy together most nights, and she's teaching me to cook real food instead of just ordering takeout all the time. I keep thinking about what you said about independence. I don't think I really understood what you meant before. I thought independence meant doing whatever I wanted without anyone telling me what to do. But it's actually the opposite, isn't it? It means being able to take care of yourself so you're not dependent on other people to do things for you. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure this out. I'm sorry I treated you like my personal assistant instead of my mother. I'm sorry I never said thank you for all the things you did for me, and I'm sorry I assumed you would always be there to fix my mistakes. I don't know if you'll ever want to see me again, but if you do, I promise I'm not the same person I was when you left. I'm trying to be someone you could be proud of. Love, Amanda P.S. I enclosed some pictures of the Halloween display I helped organize at work. Mr. Patterson let me take charge of the whole project. The photographs showed a modest office decorated with paper bats and fake spider webs, nothing elaborate, but clearly done with care and attention to detail. In one picture, Amanda was standing next to a carved pumpkin, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the practiced social media smile she usually wore, but something genuine and a little proud. She looked thinner, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the expensive styles she'd favored. She was wearing clothes I didn't recognize. A simple blue sweater and jeans that looked like they'd come from Target rather than the boutiques on Newberry Street. She looked like a person who worked for a living. I wrote her back that same day, my first communication since I'd left Newton. "Amanda, thank you for your letters. I can hear the changes in your voice, in the way you see the world now. I'm proud of you for taking the job, for moving when you realized the house was beyond your means, for building a relationship with Mrs. Chen. You're learning what I should have taught you years ago. I'm living in a small town in Vermont, volunteering at a community center and working with kids who need extra help with reading. It's given me time to think about what kind of mother I was and what kind of person I want to be now. I want to see you again, but not yet. I think we both need more time to become the people we're trying to be. When you're ready, really ready, not just lonely or frustrated, let me know. We can meet somewhere neutral and talk about what a relationship between us might look like going forward. I love you. I always have. But love isn't the same as enabling, and it took me too long to learn the difference. Mom fall deepened into winter in Millfield, and I settled into rhythms I'd never imagined possible. I helped organize the town's first adult literacy program, working with 3 women who dropped out of high school to have babies and now wanted to earn their GEDs. I started a book club at the library that met Tuesday evenings, discussing everything from classic literature to contemporary memoirs. I learned to cross-country ski from Tom Henderson, who turned out to be 73 years old and far more athletic than I'd ever been. I made friends, real friends, not the polite acquaintances I'd maintained in Newton. Sarah and I drove to Burlington together on weekends, browsing bookstores and farmers markets and discovering that we shared a love of independent films and good wine. Betty from the diner introduced me to her book club, different from the library one, a group of women who met monthly to discuss novels and life with equal intensity. For the first time in decades, I had a social calendar that wasn't built around Amanda's needs or schedule. I also started dating, tentatively and with great trepidation. David Patterson owned the hardware store on Main Street and had been divorced for 5 years. He asked me to dinner 3 times before I said yes, partly because I couldn't quite believe that someone might be interested in Dorothy, the person, rather than Dorothy the mother or Dorothy the widow. Our first dinner was at the Italian place 1 town over, nothing fancy, but David brought me wildflowers he'd picked himself and listened with genuine interest when I told him about my work at the community center. When he walked me to my door afterward, he kissed me goodnight like a teenager, sweet and tentative and full of possibility. "I'd like to see you again," he said, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "I'd like that too," I said, surprised to realize I meant it. Amanda's letters continued, arriving every 2 weeks like clockwork. She wrote about her job, she'd been promoted to assistant manager, her friendship with Mrs. Chen, who was teaching her to knit, her tentative attempts at dating, a coworker named James who sounded kind and patient. She wrote about learning to budget, about the satisfaction of paying her own bills, about the pride she felt in her growing independence. But more than that, she wrote about understanding. Understanding what it meant to come home exhausted from work and still need to cook dinner, clean the apartment, do laundry. Understanding what it felt like to worry about money, to make choices between wants and needs, to realize that other people had their own problems and couldn't always drop everything to solve yours. "I never realized how much you did," she wrote in her December letter. "Not just the obvious stuff like cooking and cleaning, but all the invisible work. Keeping track of when bills were due, remembering to schedule car maintenance, knowing exactly what we needed from the grocery store without having to check every cabinet. I feel like I'm discovering a whole world of responsibility that I never even knew existed. I understand now why you laughed when I told you to pay my credit card. It wasn't funny to you. It was the last straw in 25 years of me treating you like my personal problem solver instead of my mother. I'm so sorry it took me this long to see it." Christmas approached with the kind of snow that made Millfield look like a postcard. The community center organized a holiday celebration for families who might not otherwise have much of a celebration, and I found myself coordinating donations and volunteers with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years organizing Amanda's various activities and events. But this was different. These families thanked me, genuinely and repeatedly. The children hugged me without being prompted. The parents asked if there was anything they could do to help in return, offering their skills and time instead of taking my contribution for granted. Marcus, whose reading had improved dramatically over the months we'd worked together, gave me a card he'd made himself. Inside, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "Thank you for helping me find books I actually want to read. You're the best teacher ever." It was the kind of appreciation I'd craved from Amanda but had never received, and receiving it from Marcus made me realize how much I'd been starving for acknowledgement all those years. On Christmas Eve, I was decorating the small tree I'd bought for my apartment when the phone rang. I'd kept my cell phone number but changed carriers, and only a few people had the new number. Amanda wasn't one of them. It was Jennifer, calling from California, where she and Susan were hosting their annual Christmas Eve party. "How are you doing, honey?" she asked, and I could hear laughter and conversation in the background. "I'm good," I said, and realized I meant it completely. "Really good. You sound good. You sound like yourself again." I looked around my small apartment, at the tree decorated with simple glass ornaments I'd bought at the hardware store, at the books stacked on every available surface, at the photos I'd started taking of my new life, the view from my kitchen window, the sunrise over the mountains, myself with the literacy program participants at their graduation ceremony. I think I am myself again, I said. Maybe for the first time in 25 years. Have you heard from Amanda? She writes letters. Real letters, not emails or texts. She's learning to take care of herself, and she's beginning to understand what she put me through. Are you planning to see her? I'd been thinking about this question for weeks. Amanda's latest letters had a maturity to them that her earlier correspondence had lacked. She wrote about gratitude now, about responsibility, about the difference between wants and needs. She wrote like someone who'd been changed by adversity, rather than destroyed by it. Maybe soon, I said, when I'm sure we're both ready. What would ready look like? It was a good question. When I'm confident that I can see her without falling back into old patterns. When I trust myself not to rescue her from every inconvenience or mistake. When I know that she's learned to value what I have to give instead of just taking it for granted. After we hung up, I sat by my window looking out at Main Street covered in fresh snow. Lights twinkled in windows, and I could see families moving around inside their warm houses, sharing Christmas Eve traditions I could only imagine. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't spending Christmas Eve managing Amanda's expectations, or cleaning up after Amanda's holiday drama, or worrying about whether Amanda would like her presents or be disappointed by the meal, or invite people over without asking me first. Instead, I was planning to attend midnight service at the small stone church where I'd started volunteering with their food pantry, then spend Christmas morning having breakfast with Sarah and her family, who'd invited me without obligation or expectation. It was the Christmas I'd been dreaming of for years without realizing it. The knock on my door came at 10 p.m. on December 23rd, just as I was getting ready for bed. I almost didn't answer it. Who visited at that hour in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's schedule? But something made me look through the peephole. And there she was. Amanda stood in the hallway outside my apartment, snow dusting her hair and shoulders, carrying a small overnight bag and looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. She was wearing a heavy winter coat I didn't recognize and boots that looked practical rather than fashionable. Her face was thinner than in the photographs she'd sent, her cheekbones more pronounced, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. She looked like someone who'd grown up. I opened the door, and we stared at each other for a long moment. She was taller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd spent so many years looking down at her metaphorically that I'd forgotten we were actually the same height. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "How did you find me?" "I hired a private investigator. It cost me 2 weeks' salary, but I had to see you." She shifted her weight from foot to foot, nervous energy I recognized from her childhood. "I know you said to wait until I was ready, but I think I am. Or maybe I'm not. But I couldn't spend another Christmas wondering if you were okay, if you were happy, if you ever thought about me." I stepped back and let her into the apartment. She looked around with curiosity rather than judgment, taking in the small space, the simple furniture, the life I'd built without her. "It's nice," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "Cozy. Very you. Very me how?" She thought about it. Quiet, peaceful, full of books. She gestured toward the stacks of novels and memoirs that covered every surface. "You always loved reading, but you never had time for it when I lived with you." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd read her letters, where I'd eaten countless simple meals, where I'd graded papers for the literacy program participants. Amanda looked even more fragile under the harsh overhead light, but also somehow stronger. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small wrapped box and placed it carefully on the table between us. I unwrapped it slowly, aware that this was likely the first gift she'd ever bought me with her own money, chosen with her own taste, given without expectation of receiving something larger in return. Inside was a ceramic mug, clearly handmade, glazed in shades of blue and green that reminded me of the mountains visible from my window. It was imperfect, slightly lopsided with finger marks visible in the clay, but beautiful in its imperfection. "I made it," she said. "I've been taking a pottery class at the community college. Mrs. Chen suggested it, said I needed a hobby that wasn't shopping." She smiled ruefully. "It took me 6 tries to make one that didn't collapse in the kiln." I turned the mug in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the slight roughness of the glaze, the care that had gone into its creation. It was the first thing Amanda had made with her own hands since that lopsided mug from high school, the one I still used every morning in this very kitchen. "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. "It's not perfect. Perfect is overrated." We talked until nearly dawn, filling in the months we'd been apart with stories and observations and careful, tentative attempts at understanding. Amanda told me about learning to live on $15 an hour, about the humiliation of having her credit cards declined, about the gradual realization that she'd been living a fantasy life funded by my sacrifices. I told her about Millfield, about the community center, about discovering that I was still capable of being useful to people who actually valued my contributions. I told her about David, about the book club, about learning to ski at 53 and feeling proud of myself for trying something new and difficult. "You seem happy," she said as the sky outside began to lighten. "Different, but happy." "I am happy, happier than I've been in years." "I'm sorry I took that away from you for so long." "You didn't take it away, Amanda. I gave it up. There's a difference." I set the mug she'd made me on the table between us. "I thought being a good mother meant solving all your problems and eliminating all your struggles. But that's not what good mothers do. Good mothers teach their children to solve their own problems and handle their own struggles." "Why didn't you teach me that?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. "Because I was afraid. After your father died, I was terrified that something else terrible would happen to you. So I tried to control everything, to protect you from every disappointment and difficulty. I thought if I could just smooth all the rough edges of your life, you'd be happy and safe. But I wasn't happy. Not really." "No, you weren't. Happy people don't treat the people who love them the way you treated me." She winced but didn't argue. "I don't know how to make up for that." "You don't make up for it. You do better going forward." Amanda stayed for 3 days, sleeping on my pull-out couch, and fitting surprisingly well into the rhythm of my Millfield life. She came with me to the community center and helped Marcus and 2 other students with their reading, showing a patience and encouragement I'd rarely seen from her. She joined me at the diner for breakfast and charmed Betty with questions about the town's history. She even came to book club, where she listened more than she spoke, and offered thoughtful observations about the memoir we'd been discussing. On her last night, we walked through downtown Millfield in the snow, past the hardware store where David waved from behind the counter, past the library where I'd started spending Tuesday evenings, past the community center where I'd found my sense of purpose again. "I like it here," Amanda said. "I like who you are here." "Who am I here?" "Yourself. Not my mother, not Dad's wife, not the woman who lives in the nice house in Newton. Just Dorothy, who helps kids learn to read and goes on ski dates with the hardware store owner and has friends who appreciate her." We stopped in front of the community center, looking at the bulletin board in the window advertising upcoming events and volunteer opportunities. "Do you think we can have a relationship now?" she asked. "A real one, I mean. Not the old one where I treated you like a servant." "I think we can try," I said. "But it has to be different. I can't go back to being your fixer, Amanda. I won't go back to that. I don't want you to. I need to know that I can take care of myself, that I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes. I need to know that when you help me, it's because you want to, not because you feel obligated to. And I need to know that you value my time and energy as much as you value your own, that you see me as a whole person, not just as someone who exists to serve your needs." She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "I can do that. I want to do that." The next morning, I drove her to the bus station in the next town over. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and it felt different from any hug we'd shared before. Less desperate, more mutual, built on respect rather than obligation. "I love you, Mom," she said. "I love you too. But more importantly, I like who you're becoming." I watched her bus pull away, headed back to Boston and the life she was building for herself. For the first time in 25 years, I felt no urge to chase after her, to solve her problems before she encountered them, to smooth her path in ways that would ultimately weaken rather than strengthen her. Instead, I drove home to Millfield, to my small apartment, and my chosen community, and my deliberately quiet life. I made coffee in the mug Amanda had made me, the one that was imperfect and beautiful, and created with her own hands and her own effort. It tasted like the beginning of something new. Spring came early to Millfield that year, and with it came Amanda's acceptance to a state university's part-time MBA program, funded by student loans she'd qualified for herself, and a partial scholarship she'd earned through her work at Mr. Patterson's company. She was planning to study business management, to learn the skills that would help her advance in her career. "I want to understand how businesses work," she wrote in her April letter. "Not just how to file papers and answer phones, but how to create value, how to solve problems, how to build something meaningful. Mr. Patterson says I have good instincts for it, but I need the formal education to back up the instincts. I think about you a lot, about the way you transformed yourself at 53. If you can start over, If you can build a whole new life based on what you actually want rather than what other people expect from you, then I can certainly figure out how to be a functional adult at 26. We talked on the phone now every few weeks, conversations that felt balanced in a way our previous interactions never had. She told me about her classes, her work, her slowly developing relationship with James, who'd turned out to be worth waiting for. I told her about the literacy program's expansion, about my deepening relationship with David, about the small satisfactions of a life built on choice rather than obligation. On Mother's Day, she sent me a card she'd made herself, not bought at a store, but created with her own hands and her own words. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for loving me enough to leave. Thank you for teaching me that independence isn't about doing whatever I want. It's about being capable of taking care of myself and the people I love. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be. I'm proud to be your daughter. More importantly, I hope you're proud to be my mother." I was, finally. For the first time in years, I was proud of both of us. Proud of the woman I'd become when I stopped defining myself through someone else's needs. And proud of the woman she was becoming now that she'd learned to stand on her own. The note I'd left on the kitchen counter 8 months earlier had been just the beginning. The real story was what we'd both built in the space that separation had created. Her independence, my identity, and a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than one-sided obligation. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when I drove away from Newton that October morning. It was better. My daughter disappeared for 10 days without telling me. When she showed up, she said, "I was traveling through Europe with friends, pay the card, I want to go shopping." I just laughed at her audacity. The next day, I left only a note and left the house, leaving her to support herself for the first time.